is SQL tuning and system performance. So this is going to be a little bit of a technical overview. So if you're not technically inclined, I'll try to keep it. I've got to balance it for those who are and those who aren't. So I'll try to keep it to something that makes sense, but it still may be a little above, the end user type view. So the purpose of this training is to share information about how to utilize techniques and improve performance on your Laserfiche system. One thing I'd like for y'all to know is that when you do something in Laserfiche, pretty much anything in Laserfiche, no matter what it is, it's hitting the SQL server. When you log in, when you search for a document, when you put annotations in or whatever, all of those actions are going through SQL Server. So if there's slowness in your system, it's probably will come back to something to do with SQL on the back end. So it's really important that you maintain SQL. All right, so our agenda is going to be performance killers, general recommendations, database maintenance, disk layouts, SQL tips, performance monitor and counters, performance enhancements, and of course I'm going to talk about upgrades since that seems to be our favorite topic of a lot of people. All right, so the biggest performance killers in SQL is going to be not enough resources are available to SQL. I get a lot of calls in support that say searches are taking forever, I'm having a difficult time adding documents because it's sending very slowly, or something to that effect. Generally, restarting SQL will fix a lot of those errors or issues, not necessarily errors. So often when Laserfiche is slow, searches are not executing quickly. The first place to look is the SQL service's available resources. Generally, restarting the SQL Server service will have a dramatic effect and boost your performance. Well, you can't normally just go and restart SQL. I mean, there might be other databases in there. You might have Juncture or something else, so you have to be cognizant of that and talk to IT. If you have access to the SQL, you probably shouldn't have access to SQL Server, but if you do, don't just restart it on your own. Check with others because it may have impacts on other products. One of the other performance killers is not utilizing a SQL maintenance plan to rebuild certain indexes. When you add a document or you do something within Laserfiche, there's tables within the database that these things get added to, and it's just like an index card. If you just keep adding index cards in there, eventually it's kind of out of order. When you're trying to search through them, it can be difficult to find what you're looking for. So you can set up what's called a maintenance plan in SQL to reorganize those indexes or re-put them back into the proper order so that your searches execute faster, looking up documents, whatever, will execute faster. Another performance killer is utilizing search features incorrectly. We talked about searches earlier. One of the main problems that I see in support is that somebody will be using a basic search, for instance, but they'll have the OCR data checked, and they'll have all fields checked, and they'll have annotation. You're searching for every one of those items, whatever's checked there. And so if you put in the word the, and it's searching all fields of all documents, and it's also searching all text of all documents, and all annotations of all, you can imagine it takes a while, and you're going to end up with a result set that is frankly unusable probably, because you're going to get all three results set. Another killer is SQL instance being on the same server as Laserfiche. That's against best practice, but if you're a small company, it's not out of the ordinary to see that. You'll have maybe 5 users and SQL is on the same machine. That's okay as a rule. It's not, if you ask Laserfiche, they would say that's against best practice though. If you're having performance issues, separating SQL onto another machine, even a VM, is going to have dramatic effect on the performance. So separating SQL would be the first thing that I would ask to have done if we're having performance issues. All right, so some general recommendations. This comes from Laserfiche. Use a 64-bit database server. Pretty typical these days. 32-bit still out there. If you can migrating databases to another SQL instance is not a big deal. It's simply detach and then attach over on the other server, so it takes maybe 15-20 minutes of downtime to do that. So if you're on an old 2005 SQL instance on an old 32-bit server, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and move that over. You can, Laserfiche will support up to SQL 2014, so there's really no limit to we can go here but not here or any of that. So the latest and greatest will work. And I have a lot of people on 2014. Works great. More RAM is better. SQL is a memory hog. It will eat up everything that you allow it to have, and the operating system can suffer. Other programs that are on there can suffer, which they shouldn't be on there, but if they are, things can really suffer. You can cap SQL's memory usage and tell it you can only use 8 gigs of the available 12, and that can help. You're limiting SQL to that 8 gigs, but it won't eat up everything, so other things will have a problem functioning. Again, like I mentioned, capping the memory is a good thing to do. Process core speed. The speed of the cores available to SQL is more important than having more cores, and put SQL on a machine that has high-end processors. So if you're considering moving SQL and you have a couple available servers, it's not really more cores that's going to help you. So throwing 8 cores at SQL is not really going to give you more of a performance boost than giving it 4 cores with a higher gigahertz speed on the cores. Got that? Okay, all right. So make sure. Okay, database maintenance. The fragment or reorganize or rebuild the fragmented indexes regularly, which is a maintenance plan. If you're on SQL Express, you don't have these maintenance plans available to you natively because it's the free version and you get what you pay for. But if most of the larger organizations will have full SQL, and you can set up these maintenance plans that are not too difficult to set up. There's 3 tables that you really want to reorganize on a regular basis. How often is the question I get asked a lot, and it's really kind of a judgment call. If you're a smaller firm, you don't need to reorganize these every day. It's not really going to help you. If you're performing, a small amount of transactions, maybe, once every quarter to do this. If you're a large firm and you're doing millions of transactions a day, maybe you do want to do this 2 or 3 times a week. So the 3 tables that you need to look at within the SQL database, the Laserfiche SQL database, because there could be workflow and forms, are the doc table, the talk table, and the prop val table. The doc table stores or is about how many pages are stored in the volumes. The talk table are about how Laserfiche entries are stored themselves, which would be the documents. And the prop val table are field organizational structures. So those are the 3 main tables. All right, continuing on, back up your database and use an approved method and don't take shortcuts. You'd be surprised how often that happens. If you lose your database, you face losing everything. Because with the images, if you've ever looked at the images in their structure, they don't make much sense to you. And they're all just in there. So you need the database's structure to be able to have a functioning repository. When you back up the database, it can't just be done by copying the files. You can't just get the MDF and LDF files and copy them somewhere. That's not a backup. It won't work. You have to do it in very specific ways. And I've got some documentation out here. If you look on the slide here, I put some documentation together and actually did a large webinar on this several months ago that kind of walks you through all the different scenarios of how to back up SQL properly. And even if you have SQL Express, I've got a whole document on the scripts, containing the scripts and everything that you can use with screenshots and everything else to set up a backup for SQL that is not manual. It can be automated. You still got to check them, though. Just because it's automated doesn't mean you shouldn't check. Well, that leads me into my next point here. Check your backups. Don't assume they're functional. Test them from time to time. Just because you've got I've had a couple of instances where people have put this on autopilot, and for whatever reason, maybe some disk space is run out, or there was a permissions issue, it stopped functioning, but they weren't getting any alerts, no alerts were set up or anything else, and then they come and say, I got a problem, and I'm like, ew, your database is corrupted. We're going to have to, the last good backup you have is, 6 months ago, so guess what? We're rolling back 6 months. There's really not an option because I have to have the database. So you can test these backups fairly easily, too, by just simply restoring the database, going into the Laserfiche admin console. You can right-click on your repository and change the DBMS connection. Of course, you don't want to do this while people are actually using the system, but change the DBS connection to point to the restored database and restart the service. And if you can log in and you see all your entries, everything's fine. Switch it back to the and you got a successful test. It's really that simple. So there's not any reason we shouldn't be doing this. Okay, update statistics. There's a stored procedure in Laserfiche for updating statistics. Laserfiche recommends you do this. I don't know anybody who does this, frankly, but probably should. Not to say it's a good or bad thing, but it is recommended by Laserfiche, so I'm going to throw that out there. Shrink the transaction log only as needed. When you back up SQL, if you don't do it through one of the approved methods, it doesn't shrink the transaction log. So if you're taking a snapshot of the server using some VMware tool or whatever, that transaction log will grow forever and will eat up. I saw one the other day. It was almost a terabyte in size, but it had never been shrunk. There are ways to shrink the transaction log, but it should not be something that you do all the time. And that's per Laserfiche.
Question.
All right.
Here. Mark's wondering if we host with Cities Digital, how can we test backups? Can they do that same process that you just explained? Or?
We can test your backups for you if you're hosted. It only takes a few minutes, so I mean I have no problem scheduling something to run one of those tests with you. You just let me know when you want to test it. We'll probably not do that like once a week or something, but we'll definitely do it for you, make you feel comfortable. All right, so here's a sample MS or SQL maintenance plan. This is what it looks like when you set up a maintenance plan. I'm not going to go too deep into this because, frankly, people will probably never see this from your side of things anyway, unless you're an IT guy. But this is just kind of what it's like. It's like a workflow, really. It's what are we going to be doing, and there's a graphical layout, and then you basically just schedule the event to happen at a certain time or whatever. Okay, so disk layout. This can get really deep, so I'm going to kind of just generalize here. And if you want to know more, we can certainly talk offline and we can have a discussion. I only have an hour for this, and I could probably go on for 3 hours. But split the databases across multiple arrays. A lot of people aren't going to know what that means, but there are multiple disks or spindles that so that the I/O does not become concentrated on one disk. Basically what it's saying is there's two different files, they perform two different functions. There's a bunch of different databases, and the more physical disks that you have, A, B, and C, that you put these across, the better the performance is going to be, because if you stick it all on the D drive, it's constantly hitting the D drive for all of those functions, and it can bog down the D drive and cause cause it to be delayed when you're trying to do something just because it's trying to read off a disk. It's too heavily used. It's best used with RAID 1 or 10. For best performance, to keep the databases safe, it's recommended that you use RAID or utilize RAID 1, which mirrors copies over 2 disks. So basically, it's just they make copies of each other so that there's a backup. Or RAID 10, which is striping mirrors. RAID 10 will provide the best performance output next to RAID 0. So for those of you who even know what I'm talking about, yeah. There's your recommendations right there if you want to know which RAID arrays to use. Utilize RAID 0 for the tempdb system database. This is really getting involved. If you really want to get into it, it's like going in and doing a, replacing an engine on a Honda. I can talk about replacing the battery, or we can talk about replacing the entire engine. If you really want to get this deep into replacing the engine, we can go into the tempdb databases and the RAID. But these are the recommendations that Laserfiche has: to utilize RAID 0 for the tempdb database, separate the MDF and LDF files. For the best output is going to be gained from separating the actual database files from the transaction log files, as we spoke of, across multiple disks and so on. All right, so the disk layout continued. The order of priorities for best performance. So these are the priorities, or the things that we want to do in order of how best it's going to help you. Separate the OS from the database files, and don't put the database files on the C drive where the operating system is installed. That's pretty obvious from an IT perspective. It's getting hit pretty hard as it is, so let's not put the database there too. Separate the database from the transaction log files, MDF over here on this drive set, LDF over here on this drive set, so that they each have their own drive set to work with. Separate the tempdb database from all other databases, meaning it should be on its own drive set. Utilize multiple data files. Utilize an SSD array for better performance for the TempDB database. Don't want to use the SSD array for the Laserfiche databases. So if you're wanting to use, I've gotten asked this question several times, why not use SSD? For those of you who don't know what that is, it's not a spinning disk, it's actually solid state, kind of like RAM is for your computer, so it's really quick.
Or a jump drive.
Yes, yes, exactly, like the thumb or jump drives. It's very, very fast, but they're recommending if you want to use SSDs, use it for the TempDB, but don't use it for the Laserfiche database. Apparently, it just isn't going to give you any better performance. There's also a link in here if you want to see the server logical disk layout that I was kind of talking about. All right, this is a sample disk layout. So this would be something that if you're a large system, this would kind of be how it would be laid out. So you'd have the C on RAID 1 and F on RAID 0 where the TempDB and log files go, or it could be SSD. RAID 1 for your transaction logs. It's a whole different set of drives. And the G drive would be your actual database files, so a whole different drive set. On a normal installation, we don't need to go this far. This is, if you're a really large organization, this is probably something we'd want to do. Obviously, having all these different drive sets with all these RAID arrays is not going to be the cheapest thing we've ever done, but performance-wise, it's going to give you the best performance. All right, SQL tips. Separate what will slow you down. If you have your SQL Server already has 4 databases that other programs employs, it's not going to be a good idea to add Laserfiche to the structure, meaning we have Juncture, we have Exchange, we have all these things using this one instance of SQL on this one server. Adding Laserfiche, workflow, forms, and all these other things to it is not going to be helpful. It's going to slow things down for everything. So when you're planning your move, maybe we want to stand up a VM just for Laserfiche. It'll definitely help. Limit your growth actions. Use a fixed size growth rather than a percentage. When you install Laserfiche, you have install SQL, you have the options of how the database can grow. And it's grown typically by a certain percentage. So each time it grows by 1%, 1%, 1%. That happens a lot if it's set to 1%. If we set it to grow by 1 gigabyte every time it needs to grow, you've got that space already allocated, and it'll just keep going for months and months without having to do that operation while you're trying to work all the time to keep growing and growing. All right, this is pretty critical here too. Set alerts. Do not run out of space because your SQL database automatically grows beyond the capacity of the disk that it's on. I do see this somewhat frequently, and it's a little disheartening because the disks where SQL's at, if you're not backing up the transaction logs, which is most often the cause of this, not the database itself, it grows beyond the capacity of the system or the database requirements, then everything just stops. But it doesn't really tell you a great description in Laserfiche. It just says, the database is having a problem. And so now we're going like, oh, well, what problem? Then we got to go and look at SQL and find it. And ordinarily, SQL is not just accessible to even the IT guys. They have database administrators. So we have to go through that layer. And meanwhile, Laserfiche is down this whole time while we're trying to contact Tom, who's at lunch, and nobody can do anything. So setting alerts for SQL is pretty important for your volumes too. I've seen quite a few cases where we can expand if we need to, but we get to that critical point where there's only 5 gigs left and there's no alerts being going out, and you're trying to drag a PDF in and suddenly just won't go because it's out of space. Yeah, we can expand it and it takes 10 minutes, but that guy might be at lunch too. So now we're looking at an hour with the system down just to grow the disk size. All right, full or simple recovery methods and backing up. Having your database set to full recovery mode and not backing up the transaction logs will cause them to grow indefinitely. This is kind of what I talked to or about earlier, is if you're not backing up or you're just taking a snapshot of SQL, it's not shrinking those transaction logs. And they will grow, and believe me, they will far outstrip the size of the database, eventually consuming all space available to whatever drive it's on. And maybe that drive services 3 other programs. Suddenly everything's down because we aren't backing up the transaction logs and or shrinking the transaction logs. Any questions? No?
What would be the reason to have those transaction logs grow so big? What would people use that for?
Well, it's not used by people. It's a system function in the background. When you commit a transaction to the database, the transaction log and the database talk together. So it goes to the transactional database, the LDF file, before it's committed to the MDF. And so if you need to recover back to 1 o'clock yesterday, all of that history is in the transaction logs. And it just builds and builds. Your history just builds forever because you're not backing those up and creating a restore point, if you will. So it just keeps getting larger, so that you can go back and restore those databases when you never really intend to do that anyway. You're going to restore from the snapshot that you got instead of this transaction log.
That's called truncating the logs, right, Mike? Isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, well, truncating means to cut off. You don't really want to cut it off. You either want to back it up or just, as you said, cut it out, shrink it. You know, get rid of that extraneous information that's in there that you're never going to use. So. Yeah, I mean, that is a common problem. Like I said, I saw a guy who had a 1 terabyte transaction log. Totally unnecessary, but he didn't know. He never checked. He had 20 terabytes of space, so what did he care? You know what I'm saying? Until it became time to do an upgrade, and I'm like, man, I can't copy a terabyte worth of data. We're going to have to shrink that. It went from a terabyte to like 500K that he didn't even need. He's like, wow, I got all this space back. So, yeah. All right, let's see. All right, you can use Performance Monitor to check out your activity. So if things are really slow, they're not working, again, in the IT background, you can use these performance monitors to see what might be causing the slowdowns. So you can use performance monitoring to help ascertain how your SQL database is actually performing, and maybe this is a maintenance thing. We just want to check it out on a Thursday, you know, the 20th of every month, just to see how things are performing in the background on SQL. You can use the system counters to use. You use system counters. System counters provide the information on the system resources used on a particular machine, which would be CPU, memory, all of that. And one of those counters is the processor time. So you can see how the processor is being utilized. If it's at 95% constantly, maybe we should consider adding some more cores to that. Product counters to use. Laserfiche counters provide you with detailed information about the Laserfiche activity, such as documents created or workflow output. So there's a counter in there, or a performance monitor for Laserfiche workflow subscriber and notification rates. Workflow is a little different from Laserfiche. If I create a workflow that is waiting for me to sign something and then change the field so it can go into the next step, it is constantly checking. Is this ready to go? Has it been done? Has it been done? That's taking up CPU time and everything else. So you can use these performance measures to look at that rate that it's hitting the CPUs, and maybe that means that we need to add some more, or make our workflow a little bit less intrusive. Okay, so Windows system specific counters. These are Windows counters that you can use and what they might indicate. So on the processor server, SQL server.exe, you can use the counter processor time. The red flag is if it's greater than 80%, and what that might indicate is you need more or faster cores. And on down the list here. I won't go through every one of these because I'm not sure most people really care that are here, but if you do care and you want more information, obviously contact me. I'll be glad to go over this with you. There's some more higher level SQL specific counters. These are not Windows, these are SQL specific counters and what they might indicate. All right. Another handy thing here is to use performance monitors to check activity. Performance monitoring can help you ascertain whether your SQL database is performing. So if you use performance monitoring to see what SQL's doing, how it's doing it, if there's bottlenecks, it'll help you decide whether we need to move servers, add more resources, or whatever. System counters. The system counters, we already went through this. That's weird. That was a duplicate slide. Okay, well, in any event, it was important. I wanted you all to see that again. All right, the small things that can help your system run better. You can split the volumes between physical drives. Having a large fixed volume on a single drive set can cause bottlenecks in larger systems. with not only restoration events, but export events and simply having too many users accessing documents from the same location at once. So basically, I don't want to get too deep into what volumes are, but you can consider them drive spaces, sort of like a C and D and E drive space where documents go. The more of those that you have, if you have a high-level system, you put all of that on the D drive and the SQL databases on the D drive and everything. You can see the D drive is going to be worked pretty hard. So maybe we should consider moving those volumes over to a SAN or to a different drive space where the volumes can exist without having to deal with potential interruptions from SQL or other things that are running on that drive. Column details. When you do your search, I was talking about the OCR pages columns. Remember how you can add those columns? Adding those columns can have adverse effects too. So there are certain columns which are high system demand columns that you might not want to have on there as a rule. I mean, how often do you really care about, let's say, date created? I mean, is that really an important factor? I guess it could be in some cases, but not as a rule. I'm not really going to look at that. But you have to think about when I pull up a document, it has to go through the database and find that date for each entry that it's looking at. The same thing is true with the volumes. The volume name, created by, page count, date created, those are high value or high, they're columns that are going to cause performance issues. And if you don't need them, right-click on the column headings and just remove them. And that way it doesn't have to go out and try to find them and present them before your search results or whatever it is you're waiting for comes back. Yeah, the path has a definite. Anything that can be changed. So date created is unique to that document. Let's see which other ones here. Created by is, well, while it's not unique to that particular one, page count might be, but you have to understand it's going to go out there and find this information for each one of those documents, and that can take a while and slow down your results. All right, searching using broad-ranging criteria. This is especially true if you're using a text search or the basic search with all field criteria, with all field criteria selected. Think about having to go to your file cabinet and reach each page. We already kind of covered this in the beginning. Narrow your searches. Don't do wide-ranging searches across the entire repository because it'll take a lot longer to perform those searches when you're really only interested in finding a social security number, which is a field, not necessarily a piece of text that we're trying to find. Just use the proper search. Additional performance enhancements, other heavy loading actions that can affect performance, high volume scanning. Well, that's we just got to do that. There's not much choice there, but maybe we can do that at night. Maybe we can hire somebody that does that at night instead of during the day if we're having performance problems. Indexing, so if you're re-indexing your repository, it's going to have a performance impact. Probably don't want to do that during the day. If you're migrating documents from one volume to another, definitely don't want to do that during the day. OCRing documents, briefcase imports, volume searches, archiving audit records, briefcase exports, volume exports, publishing with Plus, auditing accounts that could be audited at the same level as user accounts, and needlessly complicating security. So auditing is another common one that I see. If you have a workflow account and a forms account, and they're system accounts, so nobody's really logging in with us except workflow and forms, right? Nobody's really doing anything with those. Why are we auditing everything that it does? I mean, your audit logs will grow extreme. Do you really need to know if workflow moved a page from one file to another? Maybe so, and if that's the case, then yes, we want to continue auditing that. But if not, just know that it's going to grow your logs tremendously, capturing all these automated actions in the background. And needlessly complicated security. So if you've got, instead of using groups, you've got Bob, and he's authorized this folder and this one, but not this one, specifically denied here. If you use, and then we got Bob times 16 different users, it's going to that complicated security will also cause Bob. It's got to check for every folder and every entry and everything else to see whether Bob can even get in there. If we use like a group security, it'll actually help performance.
Speaking of security, Mike, if I remember right, I think if we have the auditing set to audit log the read function, anytime a user opens a folder, it's going to log everything that the user was able to see, if I remember right. So I think that would be
browse, yeah, I mean,
or browse. Is
yeah,
browse?
browse.
Sorry, browse. if they have the browse function, they can actually log everything that the user will be able to see,
Mm-hmm.
and it ends up logging way too much information sometimes.
Logs can grow massive. I do see this a lot, especially with Audit Trail because it uses a separate database. And so what happens with Audit Trail is there's a SQL database, but it's pulling from audit logs, which exist in the audit folder. So if you're auditing everything, you're getting rollover every day, 18 times a day. There's a brand new file. Think about it. Those are 50 megabyte files of text data. That's a lot of text data times 20, and it's got to load all of that into SQL too. It's really a big event that takes a lot of time. So narrowing down what we're really wanting to audit if you have Audit Trail, do we really need to know every time someone, I don't know, logs in, for instance? You have that under the Everyone group and you have that turned on, it's capturing all of that. Every time they browse something, every time they open something, every time they print something. Those things might need to be audited, but narrow it down to really what you want. You have the option of auditing success and failure too. So not only is it capturing every time the guy logs in, but every time he tried to log in. And so all of that's being captured and pushed up to the SQL database at the same time you're trying to high volume scan and everything's really slow and we're wondering why. I see that quite a bit. All right, splitting products to additional servers. So if you're dealing with slow performance and have utilized best practices to alleviate the problem, such as splitting SQL off, consider splitting modules off onto their own virtual machines. I see this a lot too, where everything's on one server, and that server has 4 gigs of RAM. It's the workflow server, it's the form server, it's quick field server, it's everything on this one server. You can take workflow and put it on its own VM. That's a high value. That will create some high value because it's doing a lot of work. It's using a lot of resources. You can take the full text search and indexing service and put it on its own VM. So you can split all these modules off and or combine them. You don't have to create a virtual server for every one of your applications, but you could take workflow, for instance, and put it over here and take a smaller, forms, for instance, doesn't really utilize, it's a web platform, so it doesn't really hit the server too hard. Put those two on one server, and generate maybe 3 VMs instead of, 5. But it will help you if you split these off onto their own server because they're not competing for resources. So the things that you would typically want to split off are workflow, full text indexing, and search. Maybe have a web server for forms, web access, web portal, and audit trail on one server. Have quick fields and import agent on one server, and the Rio license manager on its own server. Any questions? All right, my favorite topic, because I do all the upgrades and installs, so this is my favorite thing. When to consider an upgrade? I get asked this question constantly. I'm on 9.1. Do I need to upgrade? Well, no. Are you having problems? No. Is there something in 9.2 that's going to help you or that you're going to use that will maybe expand your use of the system? No. All right, well, why do you want to upgrade? Because it's out there. Well, maybe that's not the time to upgrade just because you can doesn't necessarily make it a good idea. We might create more problems than you solve. Well, especially if there's none to solve. And that's not saying that the product's going to create problems, but when you're migrating between servers or instituting something new or writing over a client or the server or something, there's always room for things to happen. So my rule is when to consider upgrading is that you're 3 or more major releases behind the current version. Right now we're at 9.2, so 9.1, 9.0, 8.3 is kind of iffy. If you're on 8.3, just to get up to 9, I probably recommend it. But technically, if there's nothing going wrong and you're not gaining anything from this and it's not solving a problem, there's really no reason to do that. The upgrade will resolve a problem that cannot be resolved without upgrading. So you've got a problem and the answer is to upgrade, then yes, no matter what version you're on, let's upgrade. Let's go ahead and get that done. When migrating to another server is a part of a system upgrade. If we're going to go ahead and migrate servers, might as well go, I'll have to reinstall the old version anyway. Why not just install the new version and do the upgrade right then and there? So that's also when I recommend doing it. Why not to upgrade? Just for the sake of doing it, and the upgrade serves no other purpose, as I mentioned before. If we're really not getting anything out of this, I just think it would be cool to say I was on 9.2. To get on the bleeding edge of a newly released module, you never really want to do that. I've got a couple of pioneers that like to be on the bleeding edge, and as long as they're willing to work with me on possible, because it's a brand new release, and there always seems to be some little catch that comes with a brand new release when it was released yesterday. You want to work with me on that, or maybe even on a test server? Yeah, that's cool with me. But just to do it because it was out yesterday, I probably wouldn't recommend doing that. To move from 8 to 9 for a module such as WebLink, only because it's version 9. There's a couple of things in version 9 of WebLink that are cool, but other than that, it's basically 8.4. So if you're just upgrading to WebLink 9, just to upgrade to WebLink 9 for no other reason because you're on version 9 and there's no other reason and you're not getting anything out of it, there's no real purpose behind doing that. And I wouldn't recommend that you do it. Although, if you insist, I will. All right, bonus things to know about upgrading. Office 2013 requires a minimum version of 9.0.2 to work with the Laserfiche Office integration. So if you like the Office integration and you're going to Office 2013 and you're on 8.3, it isn't going to work. We're going to have to upgrade. Workflow 9.x requires server version at or exceeding Windows 2008. Forms will require Windows 2008 and SQL 2008 as minimums. So if you're on SQL 2005 and you want to install Forms, you're either going to have to give me a different SQL server that's higher level, or we're going to have to move things to another SQL server. Moving servers will typically involve the transfer of your volume data. This can take a very long time to accomplish, and once the operation has begun, you won't want anybody writing or changing anything in the repository. When we're migrating servers, I do this a lot. Copying, let's say you got 200 gigs of volume data, it's going to take a lot longer to copy that 200 gigs of volume data than it would to copy normal 200 gigs, just because there are millions of little teeny tiny files. Read, write, takes a long, long time. So normally I will ask that we do that on a Friday, and then we'll actually perform the upgrade on Monday to kind of knock that out and give us time so there's less downtime for the system. And when you start that copy, you don't want people in there scanning documents, because that stuff that they just scanned is probably not going to make it to the new server when you bring it up. All right, Windows version up to 2012 R2, SQL up to 2014 are supported. You can go from SQL 2005 to 2014, but not from SQL 2000. I can't imagine who might still be on there, but I guess it's possible, to 2012 or 14 without stopping at 2005 or 8 in between. That's a Microsoft thing. Be sure to know the compatibility of your database upgrade with the newer version before you begin the upgrade. So again, going back to Forms, it's SQL 2008. I'm on 2005. Not going to work. We need to make sure that we already have that in place and ready to go. All right, we're very close to the end. Okay, upgrading to SQL 2014 from a previous version. There's a link here that I'd like for you to check out. It's not really anything substantial. I've done a ton of these upgrades. It's more of a something that you should just be aware of and check. For the most part, it's not a problem. Avante and Rio customers and have the web product or workflow will want to ensure that IIS role is installed on a new server with static content, ASP, ASP.NET, Windows Authentication, IIS 6 compatibility features enabled. Those are Windows features and roles. Workflow requires the message queuing feature as well. So if we're going to do an upgrade, getting these in place is going to save a lot of time when we get there. If you're using full SQL, ensure that it's been installed and any service accounts have DBO rights to the database prior to the start of the upgrade. I actually ask when I do these upgrades that you take the service account that Laserfiche is using and make it a sysadmin in SQL until we get finished with the upgrade. Then we can roll it back to DBO rights. It just makes things a lot easier. And that's it, because I can see some people are tired, and I am too. Does anybody have any questions?
What does SQL stand for?
That's homework. No. It's
more IT than
it's Microsoft SQL. It's what is it? I don't remember the acronym's name, but it's not exclusive to Microsoft. It's a language, something query language, structured query language. But Microsoft SQL refers to a database program written by Microsoft. And for 99.999% of the people that we deal with, they are using Microsoft SQL. There is the option to also use Oracle, but almost nobody will go to that level. Any other questions? No. Okay, we have any?
Mike, can you answer anything about SQL 2014? I know I've had some customers asking, should they be upgrading to 2014, and have you seen any customers use it? Has it been?
Yeah, I mean, we actually have quite a number of people using SQL 2014. For all my installs and upgrades that I do for Express, the install files include SQL 2014. So I'd probably say 25% of everybody we have is using SQL 2014. I haven't had any problems with it. Is that it?
Any other backup questions or performance questions at all? All right, Mike, thank you very much.
It's not about this. When is this going to be available on YouTube? It's our IT guys. Yeah.
Great. So great. Yeah. Yeah. We should have this available within the next week or so. It takes Peter has to compile the video and edit it and take out all the take out half of Mike's language out of there. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah, we'll make that available at the YouTube, and then the slide deck should be available tomorrow, or maybe 2 days.
Yeah, I think Monday I might be able to get them both out to you. Yeah, and I'll just PDF the slide decks, and then I'll send you a link to the video on our YouTube channel.
And just a quick reminder to everybody who is not here in person, because I've already given everybody here in person the message about Empower. If you're thinking about doing the Laserfiche conference in January, I try to keep reminding people that if you would like to go, if you are a brand new user, just bought Laserfiche, you're on it this year, you do get a free conference ticket, and if you are an existing user that's had Laserfiche for a while and you're a customer of ours, you also get a free ticket. Now, if you have an office that has a lot of people that want to go, we do have a new policy this year that's different from last year, and it's a wait list. Just because we only have so many free tickets we can distribute, we put you on a wait list, and then we try to cycle through and make sure everybody gets taken care of. At this point, we still have room. So if you would like to go to the Laserfiche conference, please let us know. Reach out to Jackie, myself, Morgan, Sean, anyone else that you know at our company that you feel like reaching out to, and we can try to take care of that, because it does fill up, and classes can fill up and so on. But it's a great event. If you need anything more, if you'd like to look more into it, it's Laserfiche/conference. I'd like to just say thank you very much, everybody, for attending the event today in person. It was great meeting some of you that I hadn't had a chance to meet yet. And our staff's all really, thankful that you're able to come out and join this group. This is really, it's a user group, and this is really about something that's for you. And if our users appreciate it, want this content, we'll keep producing it. If you find this helpful, same thing goes for anyone who's on the webinar. We do track numbers on the webinar, and we're so happy that everyone's taking advantage of that. So if you have content that you'd like us to put together, if you have questions about some particular module that you think maybe we should put together a session on, let us know. Email the account person you work with, myself, anyone, and we'll try to put that on the list for the next user group. For example, the SQL tuning, that was a request from a user in the last session, and we did a couple from the last one. So let us know, and otherwise, thank you everybody for being great clients and supporting us and spending your day with us, or your afternoon if you're on the webinar. So thanks everybody, and I'll close out here. Send us any emails or give us a call if you have any other questions. Thank you.